Shalom, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to some of our listeners. My name is Dr. Tovah Goldfine. This is TMS Roundtable Recovery. And I always say from my heart and home to your heart and home, wherever you're chiming in, we are international, streaming live weekly. Each week, we have lively discussions and interactive Q&As, and I love that. We inspire, we educate, we bring enormous resources to the mind-body neuroplastic community. Each week, we meet with outstanding and brilliant docs and health professionals and movie directors and authors and scientists, and most important, meet with individuals that have recovered or healed from chronic pain and autoimmune symptoms, as well as people on their recovery journey, because indeed it is a journey. So each week we talk, we bring home insights. I call them take-home tools, put them in your pocket. Very exciting for me each week. Today, tonight, wherever you're chiming in, I'm really honored to meet my guest tonight. I've met him in person because he lives here in my country in Israel. Paul Isaac Kane, what a beautiful name. He's originally from Canada. He's living with his family here in Israel. At age 18, Paul was clinically diagnosed with Crohn's colitis and thus began a decade-long period of chronic digestive illness. Despite taking every type of medication prescribed for IBD for over 20 years, Paul was told he had no choice but to suffer, and then to finally, in 2017, he was told he needed a surgery, a triple resection surgery, due to various inflammatory strictures that have formed in the small bowel. It was that pivotal moment that Paul, and this is how he described it to me in person as well, he decided for the first time in his life to take responsibility, full responsibility for his health and well-being, and to finally get to the bottom of what was the cause of this chronic inflammation of his gut. So we took a deep dive in microbiology, learned about what supports a healthy gut microbiome and what degrades it, and he built his own customized method based on nutrition, holistic practices, neuroplastic methods to restore gut health. Now, this allowed him to not only avoid surgery, but get off all medication. So Paul, at that time, he immersed himself with the science and the art of epigenetics and neuroplasticity, biology of the belief, and all these philosophies and methods together assisted his journey into complete recovery and healing. So now, nearly a decade later, he works as a dedicated gut health coach in order to help people manage all kinds of digestive disorders. So I am just so excited to be sitting here in my studio, in my country, in my neighborhood, in this incredible time in our calendar. It's Hanukkah all over the world, so we're celebrating Hanukkah. Paul, welcome. And as I like to say, we'd like a timeline. I'm going to be quiet and sit back.
Okay.
Maybe chime in just a little bit, but I want to hear from you. And our listeners, we're going to want to hear kind of a timeline. At age 18, at age this, what happened? And like, what was going on? What were you feeling? What doctors? And give us a little bit of a until now, and then we'll take questions
Sure.
from the listeners.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Tovah, and for hosting this conversation. Right. So, as you mentioned, I was born in Canada, and I grew up in a good, warm home environment, and I also grew up eating a lot of processed food, which was very typical of the diet then, like in the 80s. There were so many products marketed to to kids. Come home and you have Pop-Tarts, or you have like pizza pockets, or all these things that you throw into the microwave, come out of a box or a bag. And unfortunately, there was very, very little awareness of nutrition. And Canada also, I think, because of the climate, wasn't a lot of access to like fresh grown food. A lot of it was imported, and so I essentially kind of lived off a processed diet for for the first almost 2 decades of my life. Now everything was going pretty much okay until age 18. I had gone on a trip to the Caribbean during reading week. I had eaten some seafood, and I got really sick that night. And I figured it was like food poisoning, some kind of stomach bug, whatever. It would pass. I still had about 3 days left on this trip, and didn't pass. Got back home, went to see my GP. The GP said, okay, give it another few days, take some Imodium, whatever. Didn't help. It only got worse and worse. So he sent me to a specialist several days later, and the specialist said, well, we better do a colonoscopy and see what's going on. And so we did that fairly quickly, within a couple of weeks. It just continued to worsen during that time period. And and then I was clinically diagnosed after the colonoscopy with Crohn's colitis, meaning there was inflammation in both the small bowel and the large bowel. So I was very confused by all this, because I, up until then, was totally healthy and never had these issues. It was just, I mean, literally like a switch had gone on. And it was very hard for me mentally to process what was going on, because I was now hearing from the doctors that, like, this is it. This is what you can expect for the rest of your life. And I kept saying, like, what do you mean? When does it stop? When do I just go back to being the way I was a month ago? And they said, look, you've got Crohn's disease. This is an autoimmune disorder, and these diseases don't go away. Like, you basically need to manage the disease with medication for the rest of your life, and that's it. There's not much more to it than that. And I was, Dr. Tovah, I was like shell shocked. At 18, you're in the prime of your life. It was just mind-boggling, and very quickly I kind of entered into a period of depression, denialism a bit, and then once I saw it wasn't it. Look, they gave me a lot of medication at that point, and then things did start to improve, but those were medications like high-dose steroids, antibiotics, and things that you can't stay on for too long. So once they started weaning off the dosage, the symptoms just started presenting again, and it was back to lots of pain and tons of diarrhea and obviously a majorly dysfunctional gut. I was very angry about all of this. I was angry. There was a lot of anger directed towards myself. Why was this happening to me? Why was my digestive system and my immune system, because this was an autoimmune disease, why was it faulty? Because I had also been told that these are genetic conditions, and so there is some genetic element at play, which probably explains partly why this disease is presented in me. So there was a long period, many months, of just kind of being very angry, being very depressed about it, and just kind of retracting into myself and not wanting to deal with friends, family. I also felt nobody could understand what I was going through. I sometimes felt, even from my immediate family, it's like, why are you just always in your room, lying on your bed and curled up in a fetal position, because they couldn't understand what it feels like. So that's how it all started at 18. And thus began a long period of, basically being under the guidance of who was the top gastroenterologist in Canada at the time, the head of Mount Sinai in Toronto. And we switched medications a few times. I was able to join a trial for a kind of a newer medication that they were saying was promising for Crohn's and so on. And it just, for years moving forward, it was just medication and coping as best as I could with the symptoms and trying to get back to having some kind of a normal life, and mentally still being very down and confused and upset about the whole situation. And then about 6 years after I was diagnosed, I decided to do something a little crazy. I decided to move to Israel. I had been here before. It was a place I always wanted to try living in, family here. And I thought maybe by breaking out of my rut, breaking out of my environment, just breaking out, just literally leaving it all behind, packing a couple suitcases and going to the other side of the world, maybe that would help. Maybe it would do something for me. I was working a job I didn't like. I was living in an apartment I didn't like. So I just wanted to break out. And one thing I had always noticed is whenever I went to sunny countries, I felt better. Felt better in the warmer climate. I felt better in the sunshine. Two things of which you don't get a lot of in Canada. So when I arrived, I did mentally start to feel better. And to some degree, I think my symptoms got a little bit better. And I went to see a gastroenterologist here, and he didn't agree with the protocol I was on, the medications I was taking. So he tried switching me to other things. And what he felt were medications that had less side effects, potentially less harmful in the long term. And we were able to kind of switch, and I didn't notice a major difference. Didn't notice a huge improvement, but things didn't get much worse either. And I continued like that for about a year until I made the decision to kind of just back off a little bit and go, for less doctor's visits and less tests. And I just wanted a kind of a break from everything. So that's what I decided to do. And that lasted for a few years where, again, I still had symptoms, but I was able to, I guess, mask it is the best way to describe it. You learn to live with these things. Once years have gone by, before from when the period that I was diagnosed, once that amount of time goes by, you kind of forget what it's like to have a normal, functioning digestive system, and you just accept. You accept, and I was trying to be positive and optimistic, and just saying, well, okay, if this is what I have to cope with, I just need to make the best of it. And so that's what happened. But then the one thing I had zero awareness of was diet, was the food I was eating, because I continued to eat essentially the way I ate in Canada. The food is a little fresher here, right? And we have more like locally grown produce and so on. So from that aspect, I think I was eating a little better, but I still didn't really have a lot of awareness of what I was actually eating. And so, jumping to, this was about 2012 or 13, suddenly the symptoms started to get really bad again. I can't pinpoint any specific trigger, but it had always been there in the background, but then it just started getting worse. And sometimes it would, on its own, kind of get a little better, but this time it wasn't. And it was weeks, and then it was a month, and then it was a month and a half. And my wife said, you better go see a doctor. You've been unsupervised for a few years now. You're not taking medication anymore. I had decided to stop. And so I went back. And they did some tests, and they said, look, you've got the beginning of strictures. We see one stricture, which is a narrowing of the small bowel. They said that's probably a combination of inflammation and scar tissue that had been building up. So they said, we're going to try you on the most powerful medication that we have for Crohn's, which is a biologic called Remicade, infliximab. And hopefully that will help. Otherwise, you may need to have a surgery. So already there was talk of surgery back in like 2013. So we started the biologics, and one thing I think maybe relevant to the discussion about neuroplasticity is the doctor made a point of telling me before I started that what happens in almost every case is people feel really good right when they get it's an infusion that you need to get. And then you need to wait 8 weeks for the next infusion. And often there's a kind of a slow decline within that cycle. And then right before getting the next infusion, that's sort of when you feel your worst. And then you get the infusion, and then you go back to feeling much better. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So once I started receiving it, I started feeling a lot better. And over the course of the 8 weeks, it would be a kind of a decline. And this went on for a number of years, well, 4 or 5 years, until the symptoms just were getting so bad that even the Remicade was no longer helping. And I'd been put on a double dose, which I believe was quite uncommon. The nurses working in the clinic where I'd get this infusion would say to me, "Are you sure this is the right dosage? We don't usually give like a double dose of Remicade." And I said, "Well, yeah, this is, the doctors, if you can see the prescription." So despite all that, Tova, it didn't help, and things were just getting worse and worse and worse. And it was the worst that my Crohn's had been in my life. Basically, with stricture disease, food doesn't pass. Food cannot get through the very narrow parts of the small bowel. So it gets stuck there. This leads to excruciating pain. And eventually, the gut is so smart, it's a smooth muscle, right? So motility is the ability for the intestine on its own to push food down like a conveyor belt. If food gets stuck and doesn't pass, if you have an obstruction, at some point it switches and it starts pushing the food in the other direction. In other words, up. If it can't go down, it's got to go up. The intestine has like a brain of its own. You don't have to consciously think about doing any of this stuff. And so you'd have like hours of excruciating pain. I'd have hours of excruciating pain, and then hours of basically vomiting, and to the point where it was like stomach bile and things coming up. And it was hell. It was really, I could say, the lowest point in my life. I was not really able to do all that much. I was more or less bedridden, and we did an MRI, and they said, "Look, you've got 3 strictures now, long ones, 18, 20 centimeters each. It's probably most of it is scar tissue, and so the only option now is to have a surgery, a triple resection surgery, as you mentioned." So this is like 2017. So I asked, "Will this solve this whole Crohn's thing once and for all?" And they said, "Well, we can't guarantee anything." I said, "Okay, how much time will it buy me?" And they said, "Well, we can't guarantee anything. Some people do the surgery and things are quiet for years. Some people do surgery and within 6 months they need another surgery. So we can't make any promises." Statistically, a high portion of people that do the surgery do end up having to do more surgeries down the road. I think it was upwards of 70 or 80% end up doing more surgeries. So this just didn't sit well with me, and I thought, okay, this doesn't feel like the right solution. I had been scheduled for an elective surgery, because the last thing you want to do is be rushed into the emergency room and have to do an emergency surgery like that. So I'd been scheduled for an elective surgery a month later, and I was basically just waiting to do the surgery. And in that time, I was scouring the internet for some magic solution, for some new information that I hadn't known about until then. There had to be something. I had a second and a third opinion with top professors here in Israel, and they all just looked at my file and said, "No, you have to do the surgery. There's nothing else to do here." So I no longer believe in luck, but somehow I landed on these videos on YouTube by a professor of oncology of all things, Professor Gershom, based in Israel. He passed away in 2023 at the age of 94. But he had these videos that nobody had seen. Like there was dozens of views. You know, it was nobody was paying
What
any
was the
attention.
title? What was the title of the
The
video?
titles were um, the gut microbiome and its you know, connection to Crohn's and colitis and to IBD. And these were sort of like, they were like medical lectures that I guess he had recorded, that he was giving to like a medical audience. It wasn't like him speaking to just like, you know, people on YouTube. It was some kind of a lecture. And I watched, you know, he had a lot of videos and most of it was to do with cancer, but he had a few of these videos about Crohn's and colitis. And I watched some of them and they were very, you know, esoteric, and I didn't understand most of it, but I just kept hearing this thing about microbiome and how it connects with gut health and inflammatory bowel disease. And so it really like piqued my curiosity. So um, I thought to myself, I have to consult with this doctor, this professor, before I go into the surgery room. So I reached out to him, and it turns out he wasn't local. He was in Germany on a research project, but he gave me a phone number. He said, call me during these hours and we can speak. And he was, I think, you know, he was impressed that I had seen this stuff and reached out to him just out of nowhere. So he agreed to a couple of informal, you know, conversations. He couldn't take me as a patient, and he was an oncologist after all. But he agreed to informal conversations, and he opened my eyes to this whole thing about the gut microbiome. And I think, Dr. Tovah, what happened at that moment was I sort of had this epiphany because I'd never heard about this before. And I didn't even know anything about the gut microbiome and what it's doing in your body and the importance of it and so on. So I sort of had this epiphany and I asked him, do you think I can avoid this surgery? Like you're saying this is the way to deal with Crohn's. If I deal with it this way, do you think I can get out of the surgery? And he said, look, you know, all you can do is try. And I do believe if you can't get out of it entirely, you can maybe defer it. Maybe you don't have to rush right away to the surgery table. He said often these surgeries are done prematurely. He just left me with some information and I had to do the heavy lifting from there. And I did, you know, I learned about what feeds a healthy microbiome, what degrades it. I just kind of took a deep dive into this whole fascinating world of microbiology, and it was very interesting to me as well. And I started implementing some of this stuff, and very strictly. And within a couple of weeks, I started to feel a small improvement. I started to feel, you know, 10, 15% better. And that can certainly be measured with the amount of times I'm running to the washroom and the
For
amount of.
example, sorry to interrupt. For example, what did you implement in those few weeks and saw some slight change?
Yeah, well, so I learned that, you know, again, this goes right back to my childhood. Ultra processed foods are really bad for the gut microbiome. All those chemical additives degrade the good gut flora you need. Exposure to antibiotics is also a really big one. And unfortunately, I had a lot of exposure to antibiotics in my childhood and even while I was being treated with Crohn's. So I knew to you know, do everything I could to avoid taking antibiotics. And then I religiously stopped eating any processed food. So now it was all about eating whole foods, you know, as they grow in nature, nothing from a factory or, you know, with chemical food additives and so on. And that one tip alone already started to prove useful. You know, in hindsight, I guess really what I was trying to do is trying to stop any and all potential triggers of inflammation. And I now have a much better understanding of basically everything that can cause inflammation in the gut. And so I was just starting to figure that out. And, you know, so that was one important step in the right direction. It wasn't a cure-all. It certainly didn't reverse 20 years of Crohn's in a couple of weeks, but I noticed a change. So, you know, cola was out and most of the products in the supermarket were out and eating in restaurants was out because, you know, you don't know what they're doing in the kitchen. You don't know what sauces they're using that are full of all sorts of junk.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. And at the same time, my GI called me and said, look, you've got to get ready now for this surgery, which is coming up shortly. And we're about 10 days away. And I want you to stop all medication because you can't go into surgery like that with a suppressed immune system and all those drugs for Crohn's suppress your immune system. Freudian slip. Did I say oppress your immune system?
Breasts.
It's impressive too. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so she said, you can't go in with a suppressed immune system. We'll take you off all the drugs. You'll do the surgery, and then we'll get you back on them, a month or so after the surgery. In that conversation, I said, look, I've discovered some very interesting stuff about the gut microbiome, about how nutrition impacts the gut microbiome, how the way I've been eating now for most of my life is detrimental to the gut microbiome. I started already implementing some changes, and I'm feeling a little bit better. Can we defer the surgery for 1 month just to give it,
Yeah.
That surgery is irreversible, so just to give it a little bit longer. And unfortunately, she didn't agree, and she said, look, you can't deal with scar tissue in your gut through nutritional intervention. Stop wasting your time, stop coming up with crazy ideas, and you have to proceed to the surgery. But it was really at that moment, Dr. Tovah, and it was kind of nerve-wracking.
Sure.
It felt risky, but I made the decision to listen to my gut, to follow my heart. And I said to her, I need to defer the surgery for a month. And she was not happy at all. And she basically ended the conversation abruptly and actually never heard from her again after that.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah,
And just put it out there for the listeners. I'm hoping people are listening and going to see this recording, which will be up tomorrow. There'll be a recording for anyone who can't make it to the live. But, there are doctors that do recommend a nutritionist. There are some doctors that do advise. I mean, who wouldn't think nutrition is connected to this? Like, who
yeah,
wouldn't? We're not thinking that way, and we're trusting our doctors will tell us because the doctor is God in a certain chapter of our history. Doctors know everything, and we know now that lots of doctors will not talk about nutrition, and some will. And there's so much information and support and resources out there for nutrition and all the gastro conditions. It's just in your timeline that was not being told. You didn't think. We didn't have the education. We're not like it's something so intuitive, and yet it wasn't. And so let's just give the doctors the benefit of the doubt. They're
sure,
not taught. And
sure,
Schubiner always tells us, I think that you got an hour of nutrition.
yes,
And I think he was a pediatric doctor, and it's not, and he even noticed he didn't get any nutrition. And, even as a chiropractor, I didn't get a whole lot of nutrition. So you're going to, nutrition is not natural. We have to relearn it, and we all have different nutrition because we're different human beings, we're different thumbprints, we're different snowflakes. So let's just say in general, the fact that this was starting to help you and that me and you are agreeing that it would help anybody with any kind of inflammatory condition, not to get crazy about nutrition, but it is a part of the healing. And
yeah,
there's a relationship with your food
yes,
that needs to be had.
yes,
How can I eat? What can I eat? Because how could you not hate your body,
right,
hate food,
yeah,
hate eating, hate seeing any bathroom? Like,
yeah.
how could we
Well,
cannot hate that? We're going to
yes,
have to somehow meet that. So now continue talking about how you met your nutrition, you met your
yes,
microbiome, you
yes.
met your
Well,
inflammation.
this is
How more? Yeah,
this is like the best part of the story because it's like a love story, really. And um, you know, prior to this kind of awakening, I guess I would call it, um, as you said, I had a very negative relationship with the food I was eating because you need to eat, but then what you're eating is going to make you feel terrible and it's going to give you diarrhea, and so you're going to eat and then you're going to have to run to the washroom for the rest of the night. Um, because you had the audacity to eat. So um, it really does create a very negative um, connection with food, which is so detrimental because and I'm sure you have a lot to say about neuroplasticity, but it creates that pathway, right, where you're programming your subconscious mind to it's repetition. It's like every time I eat, I feel lousy. So eating equals feeling lousy, and
Yeah.
and you're just reinforcing that every day with every meal, and it's terrible, right? You're really
Yeah.
stuck in a
Yeah.
vicious cycle. You're stuck in a
Yeah.
terrible loop, and food needs to be the exact opposite. You need to harmonize that food into your body. It becomes you. That's the miracle of food, right? It
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
literally becomes you, and so you need to be in harmony with what you're eating, not in conflict with what you're eating. And I fear that most people with IBD are in conflict with what they're eating. Um, and then if you add to that like zero awareness of what might be doing you really bad and what might be better to eat, you're just in the dark. You're just feeling around in the dark, stumbling around in the dark is probably a better description. And yeah, and people, I stayed like I was in that situation for a couple of decades. But then, so I started to understand, okay, cutting out ultra processed food, so no more food additive, chemical additives, things like that. Cola's gone, all that. Also, want to start like starving out the opportunistic bacteria in the gut microbiome that love to feed off of sugar and basically food that's really high in starches and sugars and so on. So I started eliminating all of that. So no more, even if it's like quote unquote natural, like it's a cake that's made with flour and sugar and eggs, all of that I cut out for this period while I was trying to prompt the healing and stop the inflammation. And I created quite a narrow, diet that cut out any potential triggers of inflammation. And really, what I started to learn about the gut microbiome is it thrives off of plant fiber. So up until then, I'd been eating very little plant fiber from fruits and vegetables, um, because that's actually the advice that I was given for a long time. You need to eat a low fiber or no fiber diet, because all that fiber and roughage and so on is hard on your gut. And that's true. That's absolutely true. Mechanically speaking, if your gut is ulcerated and inflamed and you're putting lots of fiber through there, especially like, raw fruits and vegetables, they work like a brush. I mean, they literally, they clear out impacted feces and things that are accumulating in your gut, because that's what they're supposed to do. That's how they help detoxify the body. That's how they keep the bowel clean. That's how you keep bowel movements quick. You shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
sitting on the toilet for 20 minutes. It should be
Yeah.
quick. It should be a minute or two.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they have a very important function in doing that. But if your gut is diseased, if you're presenting with active symptoms of IBD, you can't really eat like that. So the challenge became, how do I get that fiber in my gut without it being too disruptive and then maybe mimicking disease symptoms and me thinking this isn't working at all because I'm still getting lots of gut pain and diarrhea and so on. And so I learned about which are the easiest sources of plant fiber
Yeah.
to digest, mostly coming from simple carbohydrate plants and fruits and vegetables, avoiding the complex carbs, and and it was also about the right cooking methods, the cleanest cooking methods. It's almost like you think of a baby, right? You give a baby Gerber's, just blend it up like fruits and vegetables,
Yeah.
um, and because their little digestive system is so new and so delicate, you can't just start giving them fried foods and all sorts of stuff. So it was exactly the same for me. So it was almost like going back to eating like a baby. And this is the love story because it started working. It really started helping. And
You say it
this,
started working. We already have a question. Of
yeah,
course, what we want to move to, here, of course, we want people to feel better, because when they feel better, they're happy.
Yeah.
But, in this work, sometimes the symptoms stay on a little longer, and they have to sort of get better at feeling less anger, less fear,
Yes.
more hope, more belief,
Yes.
more truth that their
Yes.
body's not punishing them, that there's a reason for the inflammation, that there's some imbalance in their immune system. And so somehow, even though you got symptomatic change slowly, you trusted. So there was something deeper. And I want the listeners to hear more about emotionally, you trusted, like you took risks,
Yes.
because the doctor, was really pissed at you, and you were like, most people wouldn't want to upset their doctor because another level of fear, like a secondary. So what? Tell us, speak to us, and then we'll answer one of the questions, because the listener wants to hear about what other things work. So exercise, meditation,
Yes.
were you journaling? Was God in your life, and were you just praying? Were you somehow all along, even though the darkest days of curling up, in a fetal position in your room, you just kept going. And this is this is a biology of belief of I'm not broken, deserve to be healthy. So
Yes.
talk a little bit more about that, and we'll move into
Okay.
the more
Yeah.
men.
Well, I think unfortunately, what prompted me to make this change and to finally say, like, I'm taking responsibility for my health. I'm no longer putting it in the hands of other people and just following whatever they tell me to do, because I had tried that for a couple of decades, and it was overall it's just a downward uh,
Yeah.
you know uh, result. So I think really it was um, that short period where I started to, again, I had this epiphany about the microbiome, and then I already had like a little bit of a clear path of like, okay, now here's what you need to do to try to restore a healthy gut microbiome. And it's like instructions, you follow it and you do it. And in such a short period, within a couple of weeks, I started feeling better, despite, by the way, being told by my doctor and listening to my doctor to stop all medication. So I did
Yeah.
stop, because I thought maybe I do need to rush to the surgery room anyways. This won't work, and I'll go back, begging them on my knees to please allow me to do the surgery. And so
Yeah.
I followed those instructions of stopping the medication, and yet I'm just making these changes, and I'm starting to see positive results. So that was so much positive reinforcement there within the first month. That's what inspired me to keep going.
Yeah.
And
I want to mention,
yeah,
so what we're going to call that, because one of my guests a few years ago healed some IBS, among other kinds of pain. And he studied professional athletes, and he saw that, when you have a mission and a goal, that you get into a zone, of course, emotionally. And
yes,
I think what we're saying here, it's a different story, but what I want to inspire the listeners is that you had a mission,
yes,
you had purpose. You weren't just waiting to get better.
yes,
You were causing your effect.
yes,
You
yes,
had a mission, and you were driven,
yes,
and it affected you chemically, neurologically,
yes,
uh, and your brain didn't need to protect you so much, or there was just already a new pathway, like new neurons were firing and wiring.
yes,
You had a mission,
yeah,
and you were determined. And that's a shift for a brain, for a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system, and for a body to be able to, even if you had inflammation or pain, you'd be like, it's okay. We're good. We're together.
yes,
So there was like a meeting of the
yes,
minds. And some doctors are right in there saying, hey, go ahead, let's do
yeah,
this. So there are doctors will be like, go ahead, I'm with you, let's try this. You didn't have that, but you were like, it's okay, I'm not angry at the doctor.
yeah,
I'm just going to go with my.
yeah.
So I just want to make a point about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There was that mission for sure. I felt that, and again, it was these incremental improvements that just prompted me to keep going, just stay on the path. And Dr. Tovah, there were setbacks. It wasn't just like a smooth sailing, like everything just continued to get better and better and better. There were setbacks. There were still, obstructions that would happen because maybe I just ate too much fiber or whatever, and then you get the blockages. And I had also, so as I mentioned, I was told for a couple decades not to eat fiber, or certainly not too much of it or whatever. So I really ate very little fruits and vegetables. And then what I was learning now was how to incorporate that into my diet. And I was also feeling what I believe was the healing power of fruits and vegetables. That it's not just to give you a bit of energy to keep going for the day. It can actually heal your body. It's medicinal, right? So I started looking at food so much differently. It wasn't just functional. It wasn't just to keep me going for the day. It was like the medicine. It was the medicine I needed. It was healing my body. It's what was going to get me out of this. And that was another epiphany. And I mean, it sounds funny to a lot of people, but I fell in love with all this food that I hadn't been eating for a couple of decades. I guess I had been so deprived of fresh, again, fruits and vegetables, plant food,
Yeah.
healthy food, that not only could I eat it and tolerate it, but it was helping me. It was curing me. And so it was very emotional. I was really blown away. I felt like, I don't know, it's like a miracle or something had happened. And when you live with Crohn's for so long, you're also used to like ups and downs, right? So you have like a couple of days you feel good, and then some days you don't feel so good, or like a week was good and a week was really not good, and you have these ups and downs and these flare-ups, and then they settle down a bit and then they come back. So you're always worried, like when you start feeling good, it's a countdown to the next flare-up, the next thing that's going to just wipe all your gains and send you right back to feeling miserable. But something different was happening here. I call it a deep healing. I could feel like a deep healing, and
Yeah.
it was again, it was just reinforcing all these positive emotions, that this is really helping me, and my relationship with my food started to switch from conflict to harmony, right,
Yeah.
and to love.
Yeah. Wow.
And as you say, no doubt that I was creating new pathways. And you speak about neuroplasticity. At the time, I was thinking to myself, because what I had learned was the gut microbiome is elastic. You can beat it down and neglect it and damage it for a couple of decades, and you can still improve it. You can still
Beautiful. This is a key.
reset
This
it.
is a key.
Yeah,
We're not broken. Because the body's constantly striving.
yeah,
And what is inflammation? Inflammation is healing.
yeah.
So the body is trying to
Right,
heal.
right.
So talk more about the microbiome, because you mentioned something about the emotions, which I think will be interesting to the audience.
Yes,
The
yes,
emotions and the
yes.
microbiome, and again, the small brain, and
Yeah,
then the biology of belief that
yeah,
you were reading about epigenetics, and
yeah.
Bruce Lipton, which really brings in
That's it.
the
Yeah.
power of the human body and the innate
The
intelligence.
innate
Talk more about
intelligence, yeah, the wisdom of the body. So yeah, everything you've just mentioned, it really, I started to understand. I started learning about something called nutrigenomics, which is how nutrition impacts your genetics, and specifically epigenetics, as you mentioned. Epi being Latin for above. Basically, it's science fact at this point that your genes are controlled by factors that will switch genes on and off. And you're not a slave to your genes, right? So when I was told, well, you've got Crohn's because you've got Ashkenazi genetics, and there's a high disproportion of Ashkenazi people with Crohn's, and so it's sort of this feeling of like it's your lousy genes, and that's why you have the disease, and you don't have any control over it. So also part of the epiphany here was like, wait a minute, I can control what's going on through choices I make, right? Through the food that I eat, and this new science of nutrigenomics, where eating certain foods, certain nutrient-dense foods and fiber-rich foods, can have a knock-on effect, can switch good genes on and switch bad genes off, and start helping with this healing process. So that in itself too was definitely a major kind of epiphany for me, that I could control. Is like, think of a few analogies, like I'm a conductor and the microbiome is the symphony. So as you asked, the microbiome is this massive community of tens of trillions, hundreds of trillions of microorganisms that live in your gut. and they're not part of you. They're not your own biology. You're host to them. So um,
Wow.
it's yeah. Well, you're cell for cell, you're outnumbered 10 to 1. There, the ratio is 10 to 1. There are 10 times more of them than there are of you in terms of the number of cells you have in your body and the number of these microorganisms that are living in you, in your gut. But then when you add in their genomes, because these are living organisms and they each have their own genome, epigenetics again can affect what they do, right, and how they're helping you or hindering you. Um, you're outnumbered 100 to 1. So um, the concept I thought of is you're 1% human, 99% other. And that's what the microbiome is. It's trillions and trillions and trillions of these microorganisms living in you. You get them all from the environment around you. You also receive them from your mother in the early stages of life. Even in the womb, you start, you're floating around in embryonic fluid and your mouth is open. And so it all starts at the beginning, but it's acquired. The microbiome is acquired. It's not innate. You're not, it's not part of your biology. And as we go out into the world as little toddlers, you see toddlers putting everything in their mouth. I started to understand it's not because they want to eat everything, they want to taste everything. It's because they're building their microbiome that way. They're all the microbes and that line everything in our environment, microscopic and invisible, go into their mouth and they eventually start colonizing their gut. So there are these very important stages in which you build a microbiome. Some people miss some of those stages. If you're C-section, you do unfortunately miss an important stage because the birthing process, a baby comes out covered in, everything from its mother, including feces. Everything is going on in that delivery process, and so people that are born C-section, something interesting I read is statistically higher chances of autoimmune disease because they may have missed out on an important layer of that
Interesting.
microbiome. So yeah, it's incredible. But so again, and then you may have exposure to antibiotics as you're growing up, and that's wiping out good microbes in your microbiome because the microbiome itself is like a fingerprint. Everybody has their own individual microbiome, but there are and by the way, this is the other thing. I think they understand about 5% of the microbes that live in your gut. They understand their function and what they do. So it's also a huge question mark as to what all these other ones are doing, what their function is. But it seems there's a balance for a healthy microbiome. And once that balance is disrupted, that's when the problems begin. And that's when the immune system, which is trained in early years, our immune cells go to the gut. It's like a university to learn from our gut microbiome about which pathogens to look out for the rest of your life, right? This is all stuff related to your immune system, your defense system, and how it continues to function for your whole life, and which ones are fine and belong in your body. What belongs in your body and what doesn't. Their training is in your gut microbiome. If you have from early childhood a very robust and diverse gut microbiome, you're much less likely to develop autoimmune diseases and so on. So people that grow up in these super sterile environments, it's not unfortunately it's not good because then you had a much more narrow
So I would suggest, and I mention this a lot because I have a good friend and she healed cancer, and I remember she studied everything she could about cancer. She dove in. You said the word cancer. She became friends with, when the cancer was gone, she missed her cancer because what the cancer did was help her learn about. And I suggest to the listeners, and I think this is not something people really want to do, but to learn about what's going on in your
absolutely
learn to
absolutely
they don't have to be scientists, they don't
yes
have to be doctors, they can learn. We're living in a society now where ask
for sure
ChatGPT.
yeah
But this is what you're
yeah
saying, you have to learn, you become a doctor, you become equally involved,
yes
a partner in your healing.
yes
So talk more about, you mentioned about the emotion. I want to make sure we say that
yeah
there was an emotional thing which I didn't know involved, and because look, your anger, your fear, your love, your hate, all of that all also affects your brain and your fight or flight mechanism, which affects your the way that your gut reacts and affects inflammatory reactions. So, what about the microbiome and emotions?
Yeah,
Did you tell me?
yeah, absolutely. So, it's very, very closely connected. Of course, there's the gut brain axis, which is so strong, right? And the vagus nerve is what basically transmits information. It's the line of communication between the two major organs. The gut has similar cells to brain cells, by the way. So, you've probably heard like the gut is your second brain, and there's a
Yeah.
very, very strong link there. Now, when you, I believe when you've got a disrupted gut microbiome, um, the knock-on effect is depression. Okay, I mean, it's obvious you're going to be depressed if you're sick all the time and you can't live such a functional life and so on. But I think there's also a biochemical process going on there, and your emotional state um, will impact the health of your gut microbiome. This is demonstrable. So when you are depressed, angry, anxiety, anxious, full of anxiety, that has a negative effect on your gut microbiome. So it's not just nutrition that impacts your gut microbiome, it's actually your emotional state. Um, I'm not sure anybody understands how that works. Okay, I haven't seen a great explanation, but it's observable. It's been observed. So your gut microbiome, as I said, it's elastic, and there are a lot of things that can influence it beyond nutrition. Um, by the way, vitamin D, when you stand in the sun, immediately when the sun is hitting your skin, you've got a microbiome on your skin, which is somehow connected to your gut microbiome as well. When the sun hits your skin, you start producing, I think, over 20 analogs of vitamin D, um, which vitamin D is also a hormone, and it's also something your gut microbiome um, likes to eat. So just by
Yeah.
standing in the sun, they see changes in the gut microbiome. So
I like hearing that.
yeah, so and of course, standing in the sun makes you feel good too, right? Who doesn't feel good when they're getting some sunshine?
Yeah.
So all of this emotional stuff is connected. Now, what's fascinating, which I also learned in all of this, is that um, all those feel-good hormones, right, like dopamine and serotonin, they're not created in the brain; they're created in the gut. The vast majority of
Yeah.
them are created in the gut, and they're created by the gut microbiome. It's a byproduct of feeding them well, and then they produce that biochemistry, and it gets sent to your brain via the vagus nerve. But not only is serotonin and dopamine an important, a feel-good hormone, they're very important neurotransmitters. So you're also reestablishing communication between those two organs. And I think somewhere along the line, when people get Crohn's, colitis, IBD, that line of communication gets broken somehow. Um, so that was another positive knock-on effect of the healing, process I was going through. I started just feeling a lot better. Um, but it wasn't just at the biochemical level. I think obviously it's inspiring to start feeling better after 20 years and to go back to sort of feeling normal. It's miraculous. It's beyond inspiring. It's miraculous. So, and that's going to make you happy, right? That's going to make you feel good
Right.
too.
Well, hope and gratitude, and we know this,
Yes.
and I'll say on every broadcast,
Yes.
hope and gratitude and belief are
Yes.
chemical. You feel that, you own that, you pray about it, you journal about it, you meditate about it,
Yes.
you imagine it, you visualize it, you mental rehearsal, your belly feeling better, and that is a direct emotional pathway that's created. In other words, no, I want to say it differently. What's happening is your brain is perceiving calm, okay? Hope, gratitude, and there's a lot of Joe Dispenza work which will break down the neuroscience of gratitude and, of course, biology of belief with Bruce Lipstein. But what happens is that your brain is perceiving calm. Your brain is perceiving safety. And this is the safety threat physiology that I work with. And you've been living under threat since age 17. And you began to bring safety through the food, through the breath, through the belief, through the constant, drive of I will recover, through the taking responsibility, like being an adult and saying to the doctor, I know you're doing the best you can, but I'm not going to. This is this is a huge
Yes.
paradigm shift, like you said, and the brain starts to say, "Hey, I don't need to protect you," and you're also having less anxious thoughts because
Yes.
when we have thoughts that are troublesome or we're triggered, it activates the brain
Yes.
to create information to protect us.
Yes.
And it becomes a cycle. And look, the bottom line is the basis of all disease is inflammation.
Yes.
We all know that about gut issues. And let's agree also the belly, the gut, the colon, they're these sensitive organs. And we're sensitive human
Yes.
beings. We're smart and sensitive human beings, and we all have an organ of expression. And I believe
Absolutely.
that, for me, it was I was even diagnosed with Crohn's. Nothing ever happened, thank God. But, I imagine that for some of us, the stomach and the colon is where we express ourselves. And you're so knowledgeable about this. You have so much knowledge. And my takeaway is that I think people just need to study. They need to meet their symptom.
Yes.
They need to meet their anger. They need
Yes.
to meet their fear. And this
Face
is
it.
what we're talking
Yeah.
and it's like, and that's the new medicine.
Yes.
That's the new, and that's what we're putting that to the test. We're studying
Yes.
that when we talk to our brain, that when we trust our body, when we bring calm and safety to a hijacked nervous system,
Yes.
it just changes how we feel. And, this sounds a little woo-woo, but when we get better at feeling, we feel better. And the people, some clients are like, well, then, yeah, when I feel better, then I'll be better. And I'm like, no, you got to get better at feeling first.
Yes.
It's a little bit
Yes.
counterintuitive. And you kind of went with your gut the whole time. I mean, you went with intuitive and, the intuitive gut and I said, I want our listeners to trust this process.
Yes.
And they're like, "Yeah, I did it all, doc. I did it." I'm like, "Yeah, you gotta fall one more time,
Yes.
but get
That's
up."
right.
And that's what you did. You
Yeah.
fell and you got up, and you fell and you got up, Paul. And now you're up for the long term. So tell us now
And
where you're at
yeah,
today
and I
with
just
your amazing gut.
and just yeah, and just to the falls are the most important part of the healing journey because you only learn when you fall. You don't when you're feeling great and everything's going awesome. What are you learning? You're coasting, right? So it's you really I was when I the biggest breakthroughs leveling up were the falls, right? Because you'd be doing well and then you have a setback, and then it was my chance to learn why did that happen. Nothing happens for no reason. This is what I started to understand. This is what took me out of the dark, right? Um, of chronic disease. Nothing happens for no reason. So if you start to not feel well, you've got to figure out why. Why did you have this setback? Things were going well and you have this setback. Did you eat the wrong thing? Did you have a major, emotional event of some kind? And you know, there are many different potential triggers, but I can tell you that it's very possible to get to the point where you understand exactly if you start to not feel good, what caused it, and that's that's the tool that allows you to then decide. It's a decision, how things are going to go moving forward. And you may still make that mistake again in the future, but then right away you know why it happened and you know what to do to stop it, right? So that's, to me, for me, that was a much better form of managing the disease than just sort of being blind and just trying to cope with the symptoms with
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals. So
Yeah, and we're asking the listeners also, we're asking, and I'm sure this is what you tell your clients, is that you're just gonna have to be, having a gastro disease, you become very intimate with
yes,
yourself because it's
yes,
parts of our body that normally function very much automatic, and
yes,
now they can't, and you don't.
yes,
And so there's this intimacy with oneself, there's this knowing of oneself that can set you
yeah,
free. And then people, but we kind of don't want to
yeah,
go there. But we're asking our
yeah,
clients to go there. Let us guide you. Let us help you. Let us, help you lead
yeah,
yourself and be your own gut
that's
specialist
it.
because you became your own gut specialist. And so now you're symptom free.
Yes. So and I just wanted to mention that when prior to my healing journey 9 years ago, it was always shame. There was a lot of feeling of shame because if you're at a friend's house or party or restaurant, you have to keep running to the washroom, and it's like it's kind of gross, right? I mean, at least in terms of social norms, it's like it's not that sexy, right? To be running to the toilet every 10 minutes with explosive diarrhea, and people can hear it while they're in the next room. So it's very shameful, and I did my best not to tell anybody about my disease and what was going on. But the switch when I gone on my healing journey and made this transformation, I now can't stop blabbering about it to every person. I can meet somebody on the train, and within 5 minutes, I'm telling them about my healing journey and Crohn's, and so it's just the total opposite. It's gone from shame to a badge of honor, and I
Beautiful.
also started to understand that I believe chronic disease, which I think sometimes affects people that are very sensitive.
And
It's
smart.
it's yeah. Thank you. It's a blessing. It's not a curse, but you need to understand what's going on. You need to understand why your body is crying out for, it's waving the red flag, and it's going, stop, stop. You're
Yeah.
doing something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it went from becoming like a curse to a blessing. And
Wow.
as far as today, um, I eat a much broader diet than what I did. The diet that I built for myself is a staged diet in which you have to start very restrictive, and you don't want to eat anything that can be potentially causing inflammation. You got to throw the net wide. So you might even be, you might have to you might stop eating food that isn't potentially bothering you, but you just want to really, you want to quell the inflammation, and that's when the
Yeah.
healing starts. And once the healing
Yeah.
starts, and once the gut mucosa, the mucous membrane that lines the inside of your gut, which is one cell thick, by the way, it's one cell thick. I mean, it's
Wow.
tiny, but that
Yeah.
is the gatekeeper. That's, you know, where the outside world, the outer universe and the inner universe meet. And it's a very, very, very important lining that you have to have. And most people with IBD, it's been stripped away or badly damaged. The gut microbes actually help rebuild it. Part of
Beautiful.
their, when you feed them, the byproduct that they produce helps to rebuild that. That gets
Yeah.
rebuilt, excuse me, all the
Yeah.
time, So it's a constant regeneration process. But first you got to get to
Yeah.
the point where you've stopped the inflammation, and then it all starts to come back. It regrows like a forest after
Yeah.
after a forest fire. Um, and so as for
Beautiful.
today, I do sometimes eat stuff that prior to my healing journey would have really disrupted my gut, and it doesn't have much of an effect at all. It doesn't bother me at all.
Amazing.
And I think there's also
Amazing.
some mental positive reinforcement with that. Once you start to understand that, you're no longer scared of things that you wouldn't have wanted to eat before. But I also have a completely different um, sense of like what hunger actually is, what you really, I think so much of our eating is emotion based, and
Yeah.
and programmed to believe like you have to wake up in the morning and eat a big meal, and then you have to eat another big meal at lunch, and then eat a meal for dinner, and people are often snacking in between, and then they get those cravings, they get up at late at night and they open the fridge and there's something tantalizing there, so they take some of it and they eat it. And I've come to understand all of that is just unnecessary, totally unnecessary. Um, I remember like visiting the zoo with my kids, and there were these mighty silverback gorillas, and they're just so huge and so powerful, and they're just chomping on a bit of lettuce, and they've got like, and I'm like, how can it be so powerful? And that's all they eat, and they don't even eat all that much of it. So I think we've been conditioned to eat way more than we
Yeah.
need, and certainly a lot of stuff we don't need to eat at all. um,
Yeah.
and so my relationship today is totally different with food.
Wow.
Um,
That's so
yeah,
important.
the fact of the matter is, Tova, I would say the thing that's most risky for me in terms of triggering symptoms again
Yeah.
is the emotional state. So if
Wow.
something happens that's really disruptive, um, I'll start to feel a little bit of something going on in the stomach, but I can it's a decision, and it's like a switch, and I could just quell it right away without the need for any medication. Um, and so it's all about smart choices and proper management. Not being in the dark, and
Yeah.
it works much better for me than the course I was following
Yeah.
for a couple of
Well,
decades.
I think what the takeaway is that everybody can heal.
Yes,
They will not heal like you. They will heal like they will, but they can heal. And that, when we make a decision and we just do not negotiate with a brain or a gut because we're in control. And that's what you're saying. You were in control.
yes,
You were not a slave. And I feel like doctors don't give clients and patients the choice. They know it. They know that the healing can happen. They know the innate intelligence. They know about the placebo. And I think that also people can integrate. People who are listening to this, first of all, this will be recorded. This is being recorded. We're going to say goodbye in a few minutes, but it'll be recorded up on the TMS Roundtable Recovery YouTube channel. Paul can answer questions there. His website's there. That's how you can contact him. But there are people that I meet, that you meet, that are integrating with their medical model, which is really important. They can take steroids. They can take biologics and still work with their brain, work with the nutrition,
absolutely,
work with their movements, and have the most incredible recovery.
absolutely,
So this is we're not discounting medicine. This just
absolutely,
your path
absolutely.
was your path. So people can take
Yeah,
the integrative
yeah,
path and absolutely be assured and certain
absolutely.
that they will heal.
Yes,
Certainty.
yes,
That's even why people aren't healing. They're just not doing the holistic program. Take the medication, take the anti-inflammatory, please, if that's helping
yes,
you. But if it's not,
yeah,
then stop and take a look. And I think that's what we're leaving
yeah,
today with the audience is um, that they have
yes,
choices and that there's support here and help and enormous information. Choose what's best for you, but don't you be a part of it. You be a huge part of your healing. It's a partnership.
yes. It's
So leave
very,
us
very,
with a few
very,
inspiring
yeah,
words
very
before we
important, very important point what you mentioned, Dr. Tova. And I do not advocate for anything radical. I do not advocate for just suddenly stopping all your medication. In my case, it was following the doctor's orders. That's all, and that was just happened to be, a lucky break for me. But I don't advocate for any of that because, as you said, all of this can be done in parallel, and I do believe it can be as beneficial, if not more beneficial. I do also believe there are times where, yes, you may need medication because it's an acute situation in which you suddenly just, you need a chemical intervention to stop that, to bring it down. But um, I just think people need to be wary of treating symptoms versus getting to the root cause of things. And
good.
in my
That's it.
situation, and I do believe it's a kind of a one size fits all because everybody has a gut microbiome, and it turns out everybody with IBD has a active IBD has a microbiome that's not in good shape. So I feel that was really getting to the root of the problem, and I don't know of any drug therapies that deal with the gut microbiome. So again, people have to make their own decisions about what therapies they
Wonderful.
take and what path they follow, but everything can be done certainly in parallel. I just wanted to mention that I'm doing a workshop, a free online workshop next month. The
Beautiful.
exact date is still TBD, but on my website, eatwithpaul.com, right on the homepage, just below the intro video, there is a sign up form for anybody that wants to sign up and then be
Great.
informed, notified when it's going live. And I'm going to be speaking about my first 60 days on my healing journey and speaking about what I was doing specifically, what I was eating. So hopefully that will be informative for some people.
Thank you
Yeah.
for offering it free
Yes.
and offering. And so I'm going to shout that out from the mountains
Thank you.
on my Facebook page or on the YouTube
Thank you.
because, you know, there's one thing about the free information and then there's implementing and applying it.
Yes.
And we're just here to just support everyone
Yes.
to get the information, implement it, apply it. You
Yeah.
pretty much did it on your own,
Yeah.
Paul, and that's just
Thank
outstanding.
you.
And so
You
we're
have
really
to, yeah. People,
grateful.
they have to believe in themselves. They have to believe, we didn't have time to speak about it today, maybe in another conversation, but the wisdom of the body, the miracle that is our biology, the miracle that we are, the miracle of consciousness. Nobody can really explain all this stuff, but I think there's something divine about it. We have divinity
Love it.
within us, and that was very inspiring to me too. So maybe next time we can speak more about
I
that
love it.
connection. But we all have been given this gift of this
Beautiful.
miraculous machine of some kind, bio machine that we have. That's like, it's so incredibly, it's like infinite. When we're talking about trillions of things, trillions of microorganisms, trillions of cells, all these systems interconnected, parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, microbiome, the lymphatic system. I don't know if you're aware of that. That's kind of a recently discovered system. It's all about
Yes.
sleeping and circadian rhythms. Everything comes
Yeah.
together. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's like that.
Love
It's
it.
miraculous. As above, so below. Like what's happening at the subatomic level and the genetic level is as complex
Yeah.
as our lives are out here, right? So this is all like
Yeah.
just
I love it.
miraculous stuff,
I love
and
it.
people
I love the
need to
divine.
know how much potential they
Yeah.
have in them.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I know. And that's
did you hear
it.
about
That's
the cell
anything.
voltage? Do you know that we have voltage in our cells, plus
Yeah.
and minus on the inside and the outside of our cells, 0.7 volts per cell
Yeah.
times 50 trillion cells. You could like power a whole city with the amount of energy you've got
Yeah.
in
Yeah. I
yourself,
love that.
right?
I love these little things. Like maybe you want to leave these little statements like, I love that. I love the divine. I love the power in our cells, the
Yeah.
voltage. Yeah. And everything you said was really amazing. And you really, you're like a professor, you're like a scientist, you're like on fire here. And so we have
Thank
to
you.
round up, but we will meet
Okay,
again. And I hope people reach out to
for
you. And
sure.
I'm really happy that we met. I thanked Itai who introduced us.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to see how your process and see how your practice grows
Thank
and
you.
that
Thank you for
and
the support.
anyone that I meet, I'm going to refer to you for some of your work and maybe we can work together to help people with both
Gladly.
of our knowledge. So have a wonderful rest
Thank
of
you,
the
Tovah.
evening.
Thank you so much.
God bless to everybody who's listening
Were there
and
any
the recording.
questions, or you think
Yeah, there
it's
were a handful
okay?
handful of questions, but we'll go ahead to the YouTube and they can ask on there.
Okay, super.
So I will be in touch.
Okay,
Have a wonderful night.
thanks, Dr. Tovah.
All the
Thank you so
best.
much.